Good morning. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday as we gather together. It's the last Sunday of the month, and it's the last Sunday that we're going to be looking at this topic we've looked at this month of faith. We've been looking at challenging ourselves to go to the next level. In fact, this whole year we're going to be making that journey together. What does it take for us to go to the next level, and especially in our faith, in our walk with God? We started out in the first of the year talking about a very basic question: who is God? If we are to grow in our faith, that's very foundational that we understand who He is. And not that we had it all figured out in one Sunday, but at least we brought some things together to challenge us to think about God. And then we looked at what is faith. And we looked at people like Abraham and Moses and Noah, and how they lived their lives, and they were given these amazing promises. And some of the stuff they saw fulfilled, and not all the stuff they saw fulfilled, and yet living their life based on the promises of God. And last week we looked at what it means. What we talked about, it means He's done so much for us. How do we respond to Him? How do we accept Him? We talked about it takes growing in our faith. It's not a stagnant deal, and it takes standing firm at times. That faith means standing firm, standing up for who He is and what we believe in. So now that we've done all those things, you might say, well, what's left? We've covered it all, right? We got it all figured out. Well, not quite. In fact, I don't know if we'll ever have it all figured out, and that's okay. Maybe you've asked that question, what is faith? And you think about faith, and you hear that word thrown around in different ways. But there's something we need to understand. There's a difference between faith and when it comes to our Christianity and saving faith. What is the difference between just faith and saving faith? We can have faith in a lot of different things. You had faith in the brakes on your car this morning when you came to church. Now, how many of you ever, though, have been in the situation where your faith didn't do, well, your brakes didn't do what it... I've been there. I remember when I was in high school, I hadn't had my license long. I had gone in town to this drugstore to get some stuff, and the parking lot kind of went downhill a little bit towards the building, and then it went back up, and there was a sidewalk there, then the brick building. And I went down that little incline, put on the brakes to stop, and guess what? It didn't stop. Well, the car did stop, but it was the brick wall that stopped it, all right? That's a terrible feeling, you know. You put your faith in something, then boom, all of a sudden it's not there. So faith in that type of thing isn't always solid because there's times it's not going to work. How about faith in people? You ever put your faith in someone and they disappointed you? And you thought you could depend on them and found out that you couldn't. We put our faith in all kinds of... We put our faith in our money, our retirement, our careers, whatever it might be. But you have to look at those things, and you'd have to admit that type of faith and faith in those type of things is not saving faith. And none of those things are going to bring you into relationship with God that would bring us into His presence for eternity. So, where are you at in your faith? Have you ever had questions about your faith? If you have, that's okay. It's not unusual for you to wonder. You're not alone. In fact, it's interesting as you go through the Gospels, Jesus did what to His disciples on more than one occasion? He rebuked them because of their lack of faith. They would see something and it's kind of like, come on, guys. What's it take? And they were right there with Jesus and saw the things He did. Maybe we relate to, there's a story in the New Testament. It's recorded in Matthew and it's recorded in Mark. And I want to read the Mark portion of it. But it is a story that it's right after the transfiguration. Peter, James, and John went up to Jesus on the mountain there, and He was transfigured before them. And they came down off of that mountaintop, that literal mountaintop experience, and there was a crowd gathered. And there were the disciples that weren't taken up to the mountain. They were there, and there was kind of a crowd gathered around. And as Jesus and the disciples approached, they received this story. One of the disciples comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, we tried to cast the demon out of this little boy. This father had brought his son to the disciples and probably looking for Jesus, and seeing Jesus wasn't there, said to the disciples, can you cast out this demon? And they couldn't do it. And they went up to Jesus and said, what's going on here? We thought we could do this. And Jesus then turns to the boy's father and has this conversation in Mark 9, 20 through 24. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And then Jesus gives an interesting response. Verse 23, he says, if you can, said Jesus. In other words, he's questioning what the guy said to him. He said, what do you mean, if you can? Everything is possible for him who believes. And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. You ever been there? Lord, I believe. And this father obviously had a belief in Christ and what he could do, or he wouldn't even brought his son to Jesus. And he says, but Lord, help me in my unbelief. There are times when we don't understand everything. There are times when we maybe even question our own faith. Lord, do I even believe it? Where am I at? Well, this may sound strange, but it's okay to struggle with your faith. And here's what I mean by that. Because that means at least you care. That means at least you're searching and you're seeking and you're trying to grow. And faith is not a one-time deal. It is a process. I remember I was 35. If you want to think that was 7 years ago, that's fine. But several years ago, had a ruptured disc in my back. And I still remember it. It was on a Sunday evening, and I went into our utility room, didn't think the furnace was working right. Remember those things, furnaces? And I bent down, and something popped in my back, and I could barely, man, it hurt. I couldn't get back up. Now, there's a funny story on Judy that I'll go ahead and tell it. And she's saying no because she knows what it is. Literally, I could not bend to get in the car, all right? And we had this old 68 Chevy pickup, straight stick on the floor, manual transmission, and had to walk out to that truck and literally got in and crawled in and had my rear towards the dash and my head towards the back of the seat. And we rode to the hospital like that, all right? And we get to the hospital, and I said to Judy, go up to the side. There's the emergency room entrance. No, you can't use that. And we're, probably 50, I don't know, we'll say 100 yards, but it wasn't that far, from this door. And she says, go in that door over there. I said, what? And she said, no, just walk over there. So I walk, I get out, finally I crawl across the grass, get to that door. It's locked. I have to go around to guess where I ended up going in, the emergency room door. Judy was there waiting on me. She parked the car and had gone in. But anyway, where was I going with that? But anyway, what all happened eventually was I had a ruptured disc and had to have back surgery. But I remember waiting for that surgery, laying in bed, thinking, Lord, it would be so much easier if you just reach down and just touch me and heal me. And in my typical fashion, Lord, I really don't have time for all of this. Just make me better. And he chose not to do it through that means. I did go ahead and have surgery and have not had a minute's problem after that. And after I've given stories about my open heart surgery, so I won't go into that. But I kind of had some of the same things. Lord, it'd be a lot easier if you just reach down and touch me. But through those experiences, what I learned was this, that God is the one who gives healing. And God is the one who gives strength. After my open heart surgery, they done it all right. They put all the parts back in and got them hooked up. They didn't have any extra parts afterwards, which is good, better than some projects I have when I work on them. And I remember walking down the hallway one day and realizing, even though mechanically and physically everything was there and put back together, I still had to depend on God for the healing to bring it all together and make it work the way He meant it to. And He did. And what I learned from those experiences was two things. One, at 37, when that heart surgery happened, I just started being the senior minister at the church I'd been at for 13 years as youth minister, and things were going great and kind of on the top of the world. And you kind of think you're invincible in those times. And you kind of think that you're not even mortal. You're beyond that. And it hit me, wow, I'm a mortal being. And I've got to depend on God for a lot of things in my life. And it also gave me a sense of empathy and understanding, so that in the days that would follow and even up to today, I have a better understanding of people when they're dealing with major things in their life or issues or health or going hospital calling. Why? Because I've been there and I have done that. And God taught me those things through a time that was not pleasant and through some things that I wish I wouldn't have had experience at the time. But as I look back on that, I realized that was one of those faith moments. And that's why I say, if you don't have your faith all figured out and you're still struggling, good. Because faith is not a one-time deal. It's not a one and you're done type of thing. Because faith always presents a constant learning curve. There's always something, as we talk about going to the next level, there's always something new to learn. There's always something there that we can draw from. And today I want us to think about that. Now I'm going to put on my professor hat. I don't do that a lot, and give you a theological and historical perspective on this thing called faith at a significant time in the history of the development of the church. I'm going to take you way back to the 1500s. There was a guy by the name of Martin Luther. Martin Luther struggled with the Catholic Church at that time because they were doing some things that he didn't agree with. One of the things was that they were selling what they called indulgences. And an indulgent was basically a payment for someone that had died that you weren't sure if they got into heaven, and the church had said, well, we need to raise some money, so if you want to give us $20 and we'll give you, an assurance that your loved one is in heaven. And Martin Luther said, oh, that doesn't quite seem right. And he nailed to the Wittenberg door, the cathedral there, 95 theses as opposition to some of the stuff was going on. He didn't intend to break away from the church. He wasn't trying to be a rabble-rouser. He just said, there's some things that we need to talk about here. And the church then said, no, you're no longer a part of us. And that's beginning, you may have heard of this term, the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And through the Protestant Reformation became another major section of the church, and they began developing their teachings and their beliefs and what they taught, and one of those aspects was faith. And there were three things they said that were essential to faith, and I agree with most of what they had to say, and just because I found these words in their Latin, I'm going to try to pronounce them. These are the three things, and you can tell me how bad I did here. But they said there were three central aspects to faith. One, notitia, assensus, and fiducia. Now, that got you all excited. I could tell, all right? Right, it means nothing to you. But here's some three things I think that we need to understand about faith if we're going to grow in our faith, if we're going to understand what saving faith is. And the first is simply this. The first point there, notitia, is that there are some basic knowledge things that we need to know. There's some basic facts or doctrines about who Jesus is. You can't have faith if you don't know what it is you are placing your faith in. You can't have faith unless you have a knowledge and understanding of some basic things. And some of the basic things of faith is about who is Jesus. And some of the basic foundational things about Jesus is that he was the Son of God, that he did come to earth, that he died for our sins on the cross, that he was buried and that he rose from the grave and he's ascended in heaven and someday he's going to come back. Those are some basic facts about Jesus that if you don't have those, you can't say you have faith in Christ, because those are some basic things. So the basic things in our faith that we need to know in our mind and understand that these things are essential, kind of the foundational blocks to build on. But the second level after that is the assent, or giving our assent to those things. And what that means is that I take those basic facts and that knowledge and I assent, or I agree that they are more than just knowledge facts, but they are facts that impact my life and can change my heart. See, that's going to the next level. And that's also essential in faith. We're going to read a passage from James. It says, you say you believe? Big deal. Even the demons say that and shudder. So there's then that second level. These are the facts, but I know that these facts are more than just things. They are something that can change my heart and change my life. And the third thing, the fiducia, is, and this is where I would differ a little bit with Martin Luther, he swung the pendulum so far from the works-only salvation, and he swung it all the way over here and said, well, it's got to be just faith only. It's nothing that man can do to be a part of this process of salvation. And that's where I say you need to swing the pendulum back and come to the understanding that putting faith into action is important also. And that leads into the sermon for the day. And you're thinking, oh man, we're going to be here till 3 o'clock, all right? Nah. The book of James, which is a book that Martin Luther didn't necessarily like, the book of James brings the two together and says, all right, we need to have an understanding here. And in fact, they say James is one of the earliest books in the New Testament, one of the earliest books written. There's a basic understanding that we need to have, and we're going to turn to James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. I'm going to read the whole passage, and then we're going to go back and break it down. So listen, and then we're going to go back and divide it up. Here it is. James says, what good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accompanied by action is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. You believe that there is one God? Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish man, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was it not our ancestor Abraham who considered righteousness for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is justified by what he does, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. And I've broken that passage down into three thoughts about faith and what it is and what is a saving faith. And the first is simply that this: faith reflects the heart of Jesus. Here's what I meant by that. Look at these verses. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no needs? Can such a faith save him? Then he gives that illustration. What if you see someone who doesn't have clothes or doesn't have food? and one of you says, hey, man, hope you're warm today. See ya. Or hope you find some food. See ya. Like going out in the parking lot today without an umbrella, I said, hey, hope you stay dry. Good luck, while I'm sitting here holding an umbrella in my hand. And it hit me that what James is saying is really faith, I think, reflects the heart of Jesus. Think about Jesus. He touched the lepers when everyone else would do what? Avoid them at all costs. They would see lepers coming down the road and they would stop. They would first shout, unclean, unclean. That's what the lepers were supposed to yell. And especially the religious leaders, they would see that. They'd cross over the other side of the road and go past them and then come back because they didn't want anything to do with them. What did Jesus do? He touched the lepers and healed them. There was a guy that lived in a graveyard. Now you said, that's kind of weird. Well, the reason he lived in a graveyard, it was on the other side of the Sea of Galilee because the city had cast him out of their presence and he was possessed with demons, not just one, but many. And Jesus goes up to him and starts having a conversation with him, which was bizarre enough. And then he heals him and casts those demons out. And the guy's so grateful. He says, I want to become one of your disciples. I want to go with you. And Jesus says, no, I got something better for you. I want you to go back into town and I want you to show them what I have done for you. And the one they had cast out became their missionary. Jesus fed 5,000. And we hear a lot about that. We know that story. What was the big deal about feeding 5,000? Well, how much fish did he have? 2 fish. And how many loaves of bread? 5. All right. And we know that story, but you remember what the disciples said to Jesus prior to that miracle? Jesus, man, we've been here a long time. All these people are hungry. Get them out of here. Send them home. We don't have enough to feed them. Yet Jesus says, had compassion on the crowd, and they sit down and said, no, guys, we're going to have a picnic. And they did. So simply what I'm saying is when James says that we have faith, our faith should reflect the heart of Jesus in the way we see the world around us. And I love our mission so much because I think it brings it down. It says our mission is to love God and love our neighbor by how? By being the hands, feet, and the heart of Jesus. It's seeing things and responding to that. And every one of us are in a different situation. We run into different people. We see different things. And wherever that works for you, James just wants us to know, don't just say you believe, but somewhere along the way, you've got to show that you believe. And that many times comes by being the hands, feet, and heart of Jesus. So faith reflects the heart of Jesus. He goes on, faith makes doing and believing equal partners. James says it's not one versus the other, and that's what some were saying. Oh, I have faith. Oh, I have deeds. And James says, so? He makes them equal partners. He says, but someone will say to you, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. Then down in verse 24, he goes on and he says, you see that a person is justified by what he does and not by faith alone. And he gives the illustration of Abraham. Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. And what does Abraham do? He gathers them together. He goes up to the mountaintop, and he doesn't stand around thinking, all right, well, surely God's got a different plan here. It says he bound him up, put him on the altar, lifted the knife up, ready to come down, and then God stopped him. Said, oh, Abraham, no, don't do that. And that act really put Abraham in the Hall of Fame of faith. And James says, you know what? Faith makes doing and believing equal partners. That's so important. One is not more important than the other, and you can't depend on just one or just depend on the other. James is basically saying, look, our faith comes together, and it's not faith alone. It's not works alone. It's when our faith is expressed by what we do. And that's key. It's an internal deal. You're not doing things just to earn brownie points with God. You're doing things because you're reflecting who Jesus is to people around you. One final thing. Faith without deeds is dead. Verses 25. Oops. I went backwards here. Verse 25 says, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Faith without deeds is dead. And it's an interesting contrast. Abraham, Abraham, he was a great guy. We've all heard of Abraham. Maybe we sang that crazy song at some point in our lives with kids, or maybe your one. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. It has like 4,000 verses. And when I used to be a youth minister and wanted to torture the kids, I'd make them to sing all of those verses and march around and all these things. We know the faith of Abraham when wow, look at him. But Rahab, as an example of faith? Come on. A prostitute? Why in the world is she even mentioned here? Well, the story is, back in the Old Testament, when the children of Israel had gone across the Jordan River and they were getting ready to go into the Promised Land, there was a big city that stood in their way, and it's called Jericho. And Joshua said, this is a big city. Let's send some spies in. Let's come up with a strategy. What Joshua didn't know, that God had it all figured out already, but they hadn't gotten to that point yet. And they went in, and the city officials heard that there were men spying, and they started searching for them, and they ran to this woman's house, Rahab, and she hid them from those that were searching from them. And then she made a deal with them and said, tell you what, I'm going to let you out the window over the wall, and when you come and destroy this city, please spare me and my family. Now, how is that an act of faith? It's because she believed so much in the power of the God of the children of Israel that she was willing to put her life on the line for it. And you think, well, she made a deal. Well, she did. But she couldn't have made a deal without that element of faith. And I think, whether it was Rahab or someone else, I think there's a reason for the contrast here in the book of James. How do you go from Abraham to Rahab? I think the point is this. No matter who you are, God looks at your heart and intent, and He wants us to live a life that shows that we believe in who He is and what He can do. If the two don't go together, he says, it's like a body without a spirit. It's a corpse. It's dead. So here's my next level challenge for you this week. Once you read through the book of James, through the daily reading, one chapter a day, Monday through Friday, I want you to underline, I want you to mark, or I want you somehow to see the things that James says, this is what you do when you have faith. And there you'll find several things in there. What is faith? What does it mean? What is saving faith? It's bringing it all together and letting it all change your life. I want to close with this little story. Maybe you've heard of this guy, Blondin. Blondin was an aerialist. He was a tightrope walker. And he visited Niagara Falls and had this crazy idea. He said, I think I could string a rope across the Gulf here and walk across that tightrope. So he came up with that crazy idea, and he strung that rope across there, and he made a plan, and he advertised it, and all kinds of people gathered, and he charged them $0.25 apiece to see this. Now, that's back when $0.25 actually was worth something. You know what he did? He walked across that gulf. But he didn't do it just one time. He did it 300 times between the years of 1859 and 1896, 1,300 feet of rope. And he was known for doing antics. He would go out and he'd set a chair down, and then he'd do somersaults, or he'd go backwards. One time he took a stove out there and set it down and made an omelet and ate the omelet, then picked it up and went on his way. Well, the story is told that one day he had a wheelbarrow, and he walked across with the wheelbarrow, and he came back to the other side, and he looked at the crowd and he said, how many of you think that I could go across if there was a man in the wheelbarrow? Of course, the crowd, yeah, we believe. And then he said, you've heard this, which of you will get in the wheelbarrow? And it was the one that would, was the one that said, I believe, and I'm willing to stake my life on it. God has called us to have faith in Him. Jesus staked His life on it, and He invited us to do the same. Because in the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, there's a verse in chapter 2 that says this, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let us have that type of saving faith till we take that last breath. Let's remain faithful to Him. Let's pray.